So that's where things got gnarly. So it's raining, and it started raining pretty heavily. This is a track where you struggle to drive this in the daytime in the dry, and all of a sudden we had a dead four-wheel drive, dark, and it's pouring down rain.
I went through the Brindabellas for a bit of a play as well, and I put that thing almost entirely on its side by driving through a rut, which was about as deep as the Zook. I still have nightmares about it to this day.
They ended up spotting me some cash to fill up the GU to get to the next town, because I had to be at the next town to be able to meet my deadline.
Hey guys, how you going?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, good, Brenno. How are you?
Oh mate, hasn't it been a while? Jeez, this lockdown's been a bugger.
I know. Camping in the backyard is the only thing I can do at the moment, so...
I never thought I'd miss going to work.
What do you mean, miss going to work? You were supposed to be going to work. Well, the whole point is you were supposed to be working from home, mate.
Going to work.
Hey boys, I thought I'd get you together and have a little bit of a backyard campfire yarns. Here's the topic for today's campfire yarns. The topic is my craziest four-wheel drive trip ever. Now, I've got photos from both of you guys, so I've got a bit of an idea about what you're going to talk about, but not really. And before I get into it, it's probably worth just, for the viewers at home, sharing a little bit of all three of our backstories, because before we were here at Adventure Kings, we all got our start working for a now defunct magazine called Four Drive Action Magazine. Cahn, you were the tech journo. Mitch, you were the junior journo, just come on board, and I was the editor, and somehow we managed to put a magazine out every couple of weeks or so. So I'm going to kick it off. So, my craziest four-wheel drive trip ever. I think this was 2013, 2014, something like that. I was running a trip for the magazine with a bunch of readers, and we were just hitting the tracks for about, I think it was about 4 or 5 days. We started in the Wadigans, just north of Sydney, and we hit every hotspot for four-wheel driving that we could hit on the way up the coast. We went to Foster, went to Port Macquarie, ended up at Coffs Harbour, and just drove every tough track that we could possibly find. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this track, and some viewers at home might have heard of this before, but it's called Daniels Point Road in the Wadigans. It's closed now, sadly, but it's a pretty wild track. It's sort of this crazy track that drops down into this massive valley, and there's mud and all sorts of nastiness at the bottom. Either side, doesn't matter which end you used to start or finish at, you could go either way. It was just gnarly. It was like hectic drops down and then just wild winching, driving climbs all the way back up. I was in our Project GU, our 4.2 GU patrol that we've been building up for about a year or two. That thing was a bit of a rig. We put a 4.2 in it, all turboed up, and it had, you know, lockers and diff gears, 35 bar work, all the good stuff that you put on an old patrol. And the adventure kind of started a little bit before I actually got to the tracks, because that was a work rig, and as work rigs go, they often get a bit thrashed, and, you know, they don't get quite the amount of care taken from everyone who drives them as they probably should if it was your own personal car. So on the way up there, I remember I'm coming over the hills on the highway, and this thing is just boiling itself. And I know that's pretty hard to believe with a 4.2 patrol.
They don't do that. Never heard of a 4.2 boiling over.
I ducked down into back to Gosford to a mate had a workshop, and just used a corner of his driveway, pulled the radiator out, hosed it all out, left him with a massive pile of mud on his driveway, and just hooked back up again. So I catch up with the guys probably, closer to lunchtime. I've come in from one way, and I've caught up with them just as they're getting to the bottom of the descent. And everyone's been having fun, you know, there's winches out everywhere and recovery gear hanging off trees and all sorts of stuff. I'm like, man, we got to get in on this. And it just progressively got harder. The very bottom of that is just festy bog holes that you just, there's this one thing that's a drop off, and it's like bloody gunshot up in the Cape. It's just like you just drop straight down like that. And we were cruising, we got through the mud holes, and we just started our climb, big long couple of climbs back up to civilization. Some fellas brought along this Jeep, and this thing, this Grand Cherokee, I think, that was a beast. And then old mate found the limits of that poor old Jeep. Now they run uni joints instead of CVs in the front right, I'm pretty sure. I don't really know exactly if that's the right term for it. I'm sure someone out there watching will definitely correct me in the comments. And they just smashed one, and that's where it just got harder, because the daylight ended and the rain started. And we're at the bottom of this track. This is a track where you struggle to drive this in the daytime in the dry, and all of a sudden we had a dead four-wheel drive, dark, and it's pouring down rain. And honestly, guys, I know everyone says patrols are beasts, and when you do them up like that one that we had was done up, it's not hard to see why. But that day, is what cemented in my mind how much of a beast that truck was, because not only did that patrol drive that hill, but it towed 2 of the cars up that same hill. Towed them. The kind of hill that any other car would struggle to drive. Was lifting wheels and scrabbling. We pulled that, we got the wheel back on the Jeep just enough. We got a chain and a strap and all sorts of things onto it. I towed that up, and then by then it was pouring down rain, and old mate in Pajero, he was at the end of the track and it was slimy, so I ended up going back down there and towing him all the way up the top of the hill as well, and just got to the top of the hill and looked around and I'm like, this truck is an absolute weapon. And I just couldn't believe it that it had just done all that. But I've got to say, looking back, I think that's my craziest, at least my most memorable four-wheel drive trip, low-range trip that I've ever done. That patrol was an absolute beast.
Your story just reminded me, just because it was so much fun, I think the best trip I've ever been on was driving our little $0 Zook back from the Port of Melbourne back to Sydney. After it had been pretty well taken care of.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, it was looked after. It was being looked after down in Tassie. And, you know, it came off a ship. It had been pretty well lived in, I suppose. But I was given the task of basically going down, picking it up and getting back to the office. And I think I had about a week to do it. So I looked at the maps and figured out that if I played my cards right, I could probably swing up through the higher country and maybe find other couple little tracks to tackle on the way home. Now this thing, as I said, hadn't been particularly well looked after, but it was a very solid rig. We picked it up a little while before this trip as a bit of a project, and we called it the $0 Zook because we sold a bunch of gear we had in the shed and called in some favors for some gear and that sort of thing, and actually built this rig up. And it was a little weapon. So it had I think a G16B out of a Vitara, made it up to the 5-speed, had 31 muddies on it. Must have had a lift at least 2 inches and maybe more, because it really, you know, fit those 31s in pretty well. But I remember I was coming down towards Talbotville, down South Basalt Knob track, which is, if anyone's driven it, it's extremely steep, and it's not a particularly easy track at the best of times. Of course, it started raining, so it was just slick mud, and that's that second photo there. You can see the ground starting to get a bit wet. About a third of the way down that first steep section is when I found out that the blokes before me had done a little bit of damage to something, either a front axle or a CV or a hub on the right-hand side. Every time you tap the brakes, it pulled really hard to the right, like incredibly hard to the right. And it was already super steep. It was already really slick. So that hill was just, the entire thing was me terrified, but I survived. That was good. We got down to Talbotville, awesome campsite. And then we did Crooked River Track, which snakes all the way back towards Dargo, which is beautiful. But that's, of course, when you find out there's no plugs in the floor anymore, and you just end up with completely wet boots.
Yeah, we took them out because it just made the water stay in there for longer.
and now that I think about it, I'm fairly certain it had a front mechanical locker, which just made it even more ludicrous because it would lock up and do these strange things and drive one wheel. And I knew Zooks were capable, but after driving a 3-wheel drive Zook through the high country, I'm very, very impressed. And one of the keys of this trip is I really wanted to drive the highest drivable track in Australia. We didn't make it to Blue Rag on this trip because the track was closed, but I found that you could drive up to Mount Mackay in Falls Creek, which is technically the highest drivable point in Australia. We drove up there. It was, just a bit of off-road. It's nothing crazy. Went to bed, snow had fallen overnight. So it was, because it had been spitting the day before, I was kind of prepared, and I had this terrible old swag. And I ended up throwing a tarp over it because I had no faith in it whatsoever. And you can see in the morning, it's all completely collapsed, and there I am in there. I just remember getting out of bed in the morning, I was about -5 degrees body temperature, but it's all good. God.
Oh, painful.
Jumped back in the Zook, -5 body temperature. Tried to warm up, but of course someone had blown the heater. The windscreen wipers didn't work, and it didn't have a demister, so I had to drive through heavy snow with my hand out the window doing the typical snow glove and wearing a ski jacket.
To be fair, I don't know if they had a demister from factory.
Yeah, that's true. just breathe on the windscreen. The final step was we finished the high country, conquered the high country, and on the way back through I went through the Brindabellas for a bit of a play as well, and I put that thing almost entirely on its side by driving through a rut which was about as deep as the Zook. And it was just bad wheel. It was just bad wheel placement, and I still have nightmares about it to this day because it was on film. Luckily, all the film went missing.
So there's no evidence.
There's no evidence that I can't drive.
Oh, there's probably still
There's
plenty, mate.
plenty of evidence.
Very good. Okay, that is a red hot contender. I like that story, Cahn. It is time to pass over to Mitcho. I've seen some photos. I'm about to bring them up. It's a GU patrol, but a different one to the one I was talking about, mate. What's the story?
Exactly. So I was pretty stoked when I first started working here because within my first 2 weeks of working here, they sent me down to Victoria to build another GU, which was used as a camera car. Got back from Victoria. About another 2 weeks later, the boys were taking it out on its first maiden voyage through the Simpson Desert. And I was so jealous that I didn't get to go on that trip. But at the end of their trip, one of the guys that used to work with us, he walked into to where I was sitting, working away on the computer, and he goes, "Oh, Mitch, we need someone to go to Bird," and he barely even finished the word Birdsville, and I'm like, "Yep, me, I'll go." Stuck my hand up straight away. So the reason I had to go to Birdsville was because the boys were finishing up the trip there after they crossed the Simpson Desert, and they basically just needed someone to pick the car up and drive it back to Sydney. Now, I didn't know at the time that my card had expired, or I can't exactly remember what had happened there, but it either expired or it was having issues. So, and it was the only bank card that I had. Flew all the way into Birdsville, and I couldn't help myself. I had to drive out and see Big Red. I was told to do it, so had some fun in the big GU. I made it up and down Big Red, no problem. Drove back into Birdsville and went to fuel up, and my card just wasn't working, and I had no idea why. And all I had was about $50 cash on me, and so that was, luckily for me, that was just enough to pay for the fuel there. And by the time I got to the next town, I was pretty well needing some fuel already, and it was about 400 or 500 k's, I think, to Windora. So I stopped in at Windora, and the sun was going down. I'm still stuck in the middle of nowhere, and long story short with that part is the legends at Windora pub. I cannot thank them enough. And if you're going through Windora on your way out to Birdsville, or if you're coming back from Birdsville, stop in there and have a beer and buy anything you want, because they are absolute legends. They ended up spotting me some cash to fill up the GU to get to the next town, because I had to be at the next town to be able to meet my deadline. And so yeah, to this day, I still can't thank those guys enough, because that was unreal of them.
You can probably thank them by paying them back, Mitch. It's been a couple of years.
Yeah, no, I ended up calling up that pub a couple weeks later and tried to pay them back. They wouldn't accept it at first. They kept telling me that I'd probably come across them broken down on the side of the road and give them a hand at some stage, but I ended up sorting it out with them. Next time I'm out that way, I'm definitely calling in to say thank you, because they are absolute legends.
Well, there you go. Mitcho, pretty damn solid story there. In fact, 3 solid stories, or at least 2 good stories from you blokes and a bit of waffle from me. Gonna open it up to the viewers. Want to know 2 things from all you guys watching at home. Number 1, what was your favourite story out of all 3 of those? And number 2, we want to know your craziest 4-wheel drive story. So jump on down to the comments and let us know. Guys, that was a bit of fun. It was good to have an electronic beer with you guys. Hopefully lockdown's over soon and we can do the real thing around a campfire soon.
Good on you. Cheers, Brenno.
Hey, and if you liked these yarns and you want some more cool behind the scenes stuff of our adventures here at Adventure Kings, click that link in the top right corner, because Mitch will take you behind the scenes on the most epic R&D trip he's ever done with the MT1 camper trailer.